Open-world games are all about player freedom. They harness player impulse, with the best games of the genre doing as little as possible to limit player autonomy. It's a challenge for developers to strike the right balance, though, for every invisible or implied barrier or on-screen waypoint intended to corral players towards a certain direction has potential to subtly chip away at their immersion. To succeed, it's my view that players should be trusted to exist in the virtual landscape without an abundance of visual cues. The other pitfall of open-world games, of which numerous tropes in this rundown evolve, is a necessity to artificially inflate playtime by repetitive or unimaginative activities. You know the ones. Fetch this, find that, go here, etc., etc. It's not that all the tropes in this rundown are bad per se, it's just that, again, I'm talking about balance. Too much of one thing ruins immersion, and a beautifully crafted open world with the right balance of activity is amongst the most immersive experiences possible in gaming. Excessively large worlds. Traversing from point A to point B across a beautiful, visually immersive landscape is one of the central joys of open-world games. I understand that balancing map size with interactivity is a tricky aspect for developers to manage, but a world that is overly large, to me, dilutes its immersiveness. See, certain developers can't resist the urge to make a landscape as vast as possible before stuffing it with activities and random encounters and settlements at every turn. This point is expanded upon in other entries in this feature, but overall, a landscape littered with tasks feels less like adding interactivity and intrigue to the player and more like repetitive busywork to bump up overall playtime. Again, I appreciate it's supremely difficult to strike the right balance, as an empty world bereft of activity will undoubtedly become stale, but for me there's a lot of enjoyment to be had in traveling, exploring, and simply existing in a virtual world without it continually interrupting me.
Looks like this one got upstairs. You're not walking away from this.
Exploration without reward. What is an open-world game without the yearn for exploration? Freedom to lose oneself for hours is paramount in open-world games, but exploration shouldn't always feel aimless, assuming we're not just following on-screen icons to points of interest, for that isn't true exploration in my book. But we're off the beaten path by impulse, then that endorphin-tinged sense of discovery should be suitably ignited by a reward at the end of the trail. Whether that's valuable power-ups, unlockable weapons or armor, HP, narrative progression, or the simple pleasure of serene view, exploration should feel rewarding. Repetitive fetch quests. A symptom of overly inflated open worlds is repetition. There's only so many quest variations at a developer's disposal, so whilst we might be required to do the same thing over and over, if it benefits the overarching narrative in some way, then I'm all for it. However, a major bugbear of mine are fetch quests. There's always an NPC who needs me to find some herbs out in the wild, or, in slight variation but really the same thing, deliver something to someone in the next town over. Worse still are those fetch quests that are necessary to advance the story. Collect 5 ore and I'll upgrade your armor type thing. It just gets boring super quick. Unconnected side quests. It's tough to maintain narrative flow when players are free to explore vast open worlds at their own pace, so to me it beggars belief when side missions do nothing to contribute to the game's story. Whether that's literal advancement of the narrative or by fleshing out the game world, adding context to the environment to at least make it seem plausible the world would still exist and function on its own without the player. Too many map icons. There's nothing more frustrating for me than an abundance of icons on the in-game map. Playing GTA Online for the first time in a while recently, and whilst I roughly knew my way around Los Santos, those times I had to venture into the map, I became overwhelmed by the sheer number of icons on there. I found it tough to know what I'm supposed to be aiming for. More open worlds should take a leaf out of Breath of the Wild's book, by largely leaving icons behind and instead trusting the player to use their wits and sense of direction to navigate the world. On-screen nav points. You may have picked up by now that I like traveling through the vast plains of an open world. The freedom to go wherever I want is the most immersive thing for me, and I'll rarely use fast travel. Plus, what I always do if I can is turn off screen nav points. I find it much more enjoyable to find my own way there. I'm not in a rush after all. I spend most of my daily life in a rush, so diving into an open world is a form of respite where I can slow the pace of life down. In games such as Red Dead Redemption, I like to use the landmarks and natural topography to navigate. I appreciate this isn't for everyone, but I do feel game developers should trust their players to find their way a little more without chucking loads of distracting waypoints on the screen. If you haven't tried it though, give it a bash. You might find learning the lay of the land to be more immersive for you too. See also on-screen mini-maps, which mostly can't be turned off. Timed missions. Again, this doesn't really make sense if we're existing in a world which is all about freedom. Offering player agency to explore at their own free will, only to rip it away with a time limit on the next task, only serves to add frustration, for me at least. I appreciate timed missions aren't a mechanic unique to open worlds. Sure, there are plenty who think slapping limited time on an objective is a lazy way to ramp up tension, but in terms of open worlds, like I've already said, it flies in the face of those aspects which make them immersive, that is, the freedom to go as you please. Linear mission design. This entry falls loosely into the category of game missions that are shoehorned into open world design, rather than the freedom of the open world imposing itself on the mission. What I mean by that is, if player exploration is at the forefront of the experience, don't pen them into completing a mission a certain way. For example, if a mission requires me to access a building via the roof, and I figure out a way to climb up there, then the game should let me carry on. Instead, there will be a specific way, like I have to sneak past guards on ground level. Missions cloaked in linearity negate the benefit of an open world. Excessive collectibles. I'm not often a trophy completionist, so this entry doesn't grind my gears as much as others. If you are, and you like to kill 50 birds for an achievement, then crack on. For me, I just can't be bothered scouring the world for a token of recognition. Most of the time, these aren't artifacts that add lore to the game world, but dolls or birds flying in circles or whatnot randomly placed just so you can say you got them all. Not for me, thanks. Tedious crafting systems. This isn't a slight on all crafting systems, no, just the ones that feel like a chore. You know, endlessly searching for scrap or herbs, flowers, plant life, or stone, gold, reeds, whatever, you get the idea. With no powerful benefit by the end, developers should allow us to craft formidable level 99 weapons with the stuff we collect, but they often don't. Oftentimes, crafting feels tacked on to add an RPG-light element to an open-world action-adventure instead of being seamlessly built into the game's mechanics. Finally, loading wheels and cutscene animations when items are harvested or crafted need to go away. I get it can add tension if you're crafting mid-fight, but when you're only bulking up your resources, it's a time sucker. Meandering narrative. It's impossible for developers to control the pace of the game's story when players are free to tackle it at their own speed, so whilst this is indeed a trope of open-world games, it almost feels like an inevitable one that I'm unsure if there's a solution to. Perhaps ensuring all side quests support the narrative, at least until the player has completed the main story, or maybe do away with side quests altogether until the story is completed. Not sure that's the answer though, but an urgent catastrophe that can be ignored for a few hours doesn't help my immersion. Boring NPCs. How many townsfolk simply stand on their own patch all day and night? It's one of those video gamey things I think could be so much better. Shenmue showed me the way over 20 years ago now, and whilst I appreciate a lot of that game hasn't aged well, I'm still fascinated by the NPCs having their own daily routines. You'd run into them walking home from work, for example. I love Horizon Zero Dawn, don't get me wrong, but it always felt like those NPCs existed in the world just to feed me the same tired information. NPCs need to have their own daily routine, instead of just hanging around all the time. Clearing camps. Clearing camps, but also liberating settlements from bandits. Why is it that so many open worlds are just littered with pockets of baddies just waiting to occupy the tiniest settlement? The task of liberating a camp, killing off bad guys, restoring that location as a place to buy goods is tired and stale to me. Compound this with extraordinary large maps mentioned elsewhere in this feature, and you've got a task you'll need to rinse and repeat. Out of bounds. I get it, certain areas of the world need to be artificially blocked off for story reasons. It's just that roping areas off or declaring them out of bounds kind of contradicts the boundary-less exploration which open-world games champion. Worse still are story missions, whereby if you stray too far from the action, an on-screen timer kicks in, alerting you you're wayward. Repeating random encounters. Those times you first get attacked by a wild animal or run into someone who's looking for their missing sibling or just a random attack from a horde of enemies are pretty cool. They're intended to break up the monotony of traversing long distances over unpopulated terrain. However, as I say in this feature, I think there's a lot to be said in the joy of traversal throughout open-world games. I don't feel the need to be constantly bombarded, especially seeing as these seemingly random encounters keep happening. That's all for now. If you enjoy what you saw, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, now is a great time to subscribe. We upload brand new videos every single day. After subscribing, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you next time, right here on Gaming Bolt.